I want to welcome you all to the Ostrom workshop. For me, as director of the Commons program,
Sorry, I have to turn off modern technology.
I know. Usually what happens in the cybersecurity events. Okay, please.
saying that for me as director of the Commons program and as a feminist political ecologist, it is really an honor and a great pleasure to introduce one of the most influential scholars and activists in the field of environmental justice, whose work is essential to the theorization of current processes of massive enclosure, as well as of alternatives to it. Giovanna Di Chiro is professor of environmental studies at Swarthmore College and a co-founder of Serenity Solar, a campus community collaboration located in North Philadelphia that works towards community building, energy autonomy, and local food sovereignty. Those of you familiar with Professor Di Chiro's work are well aware of her timely contributions to the fields of ecofeminism and political ecology for over 2 decades. Originally trained as a marine biologist studying seaweed and coral reefs, Professor Di Chiro became increasingly interested in socio-environmental activism. My own ecobiography has been nourished constantly by her important work on social reproduction, the uneven geographies of climate change, and processes of commoning and undercommoning. Her pedagogies of active hope, her critique of the Anthropocene, and her efforts towards building a different academia are all essential tools for these times. For today's discussion, she generously shared a chapter of her forthcoming book, I can't wait to read it, entitled Decolonizing Our Common Future, Mobilizing Intersectionality as Community Worldmaking for Environmental Justice. Please join me in welcoming Professor Di Chiro.
Wow, thank you so much, Diana. That's wonderful. I'd forgotten about some of those things, including my membership in the Seaweed Sisterhood many years ago. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you to Diana for welcoming me, and thank you to Megan and Anna and others who've helped with getting me here to Bloomington. And I think this is the first time I've been here, so I'm really excited to be here in the Midwest. And thanks to everybody who's in Zoom world and for coming for this hour today. So the documents that I sent you included a brief overview of my book project, Worldmaking from the Ground Up, and an in-progress chapter that focuses on some of the commoning or undercommoning collaborations that I've been involved in Philadelphia and the region for several years. And so my aim in this chapter and in the entire book, in fact, is to explore and rethink the idea of the commons, and particularly what the commons and commoning means to members of those communities who have historically not been included or who have been made invisible in discourses of the commons, and particularly in recent discussions of environmentalism and climate crisis and commons, so-called common solutions in the name of sustainable development. So in particular, I want to, in my work, I want to examine what it means to engage in commoning practices in the context of higher education, in research practices and teaching and pedagogy, and in engaged scholarship and community action. So I have experimented over the years, as Diana mentioned, and as you, if you read the chapter that I mentioned also in this chapter, with Harney and Moten's concept of the undercommons, which, as you may know already or read in the chapter, presents a pretty strong critique of the way universities have defined and explained the commons and exploited the commons. But Harney and Moten also, I think, propose a way to be in university rather than to flee it or to leave it, and perhaps to work to change it from inside, or as a fugitive inside, or as an alongside, and that is being able to benefit from the university's resources and affordances, while also recognizing that, like all dominant and neoliberal institutions, the university doesn't actually lean towards a commons that includes diverse knowledge systems, political views, or understanding of its role in perpetuating colonial land relations and environmental injustices. So I also want to explore in my work varieties of commons practices or commoning that challenges the royal or the universal we, which is often used in environmental and sustainability discourse, as in, for example, we're all in the same boat, or our house is on fire, or we humans are destroying the planet. But rather, I'm interested in a commons or commoning practices that aim to create critical constructions of the we that are forged in practice, in collaboration, and in co-creating the co-creation of institutions and policies that build a new story of us, as sociologist Marshall Gantz has referred to it. That is, stories of how we might describe our commonalities and our common goals in ways that recognize our different stories and positionalities, and are also committed to building the knowledge and power to address the crises that we're facing now, and to be able to craft that story, which Gantz calls the story of now, to craft those stories, strategies that will help us guide how we take action now. So as someone who's worked in environmental studies departments at several institutions across the country for many years, also in Australia, I examine how contemporary movements and discourses that are focused on addressing global social and ecological crises, including environmentalism, the climate movement, the degrowth movement, sustainability, et cetera, how in these movements, the language of the commons and our common future is often deployed, is often used. But as many have argued, this conventional commons often does not include those who are or who have been negatively impacted by the crises that we are concerned with, nor are they seated at the table to discuss or research these concerns. And for many Indigenous scholars and activists, contemporary appeals to the commons are often seen as just the most recent expressions of ongoing dispossession, but now in the name of sustainability and protecting our common future. So I'm interested in imagining how we define the commons and the communities that we are a part of and or see ourselves moving into the future with. So my work and activism with my students and community partners focus on, in many ways, how to build this notion of the commons, how to build this notion of the world or the future from the ground up, from the voices and experiences and knowledges of those whose commons and futures were stolen or curtailed by colonialism, plantation economies, labor and resource exploitation, and racial and gender oppression and violence. And I think that this notion of building from the ground up I've found it has interesting resonances with the Ostrom's notion of the workshop and the need to learn how to build, and literally building tangible material things like furniture or gardens. So, and building is often, this is one of my critiques of the environmental studies departments that I've been involved in, is that building is often not really valued as much as, particularly relationship building, I would have to say. So I define commoning as the practice of relationality and place-based engagement to advance environmental justice. And I'm interested in questions, again, of who we imagine as members of our community in discussions about sustainability and environmentalism, and in discussions about the so-called just transition to more sustainable futures. Who do we see as partners in co-creating a more caring and sustainable world? So in the chapter that you read, or that you may have read or browsed through, I highlighted some of the scholars and activists whose ideas have influenced my approach to commons practice in the field of environmental justice, and with whom I've studied and collaborated over the past 4 decades. And in the second part of the chapter, I discussed some of the ways that I put these ideas into action in the Philadelphia region through my own embodied engaged scholarship and participation in social movements, in mobilizing for environmental justice focused transitions. So I just oh, okay. So you see different things than I see. That's interesting. Okay. So I always like to, why is this not allowing me to forward?
We should have her on screen. Do you mind if?
Oh, sure.
Sorry about that.
I can't believe this.
No. It's always something like this. Looks
Oh,
like
am
it
I in the
might be
wrong, I'm on
that.
the wrong one?
Let's just see if it.
It's got their arrows on the left and right at the bottom.
Oh, let's check that out. Oh, yeah, let's see if we can do that. Hey, good call, Charlie.
Why can't I use the right arrow? on
It's
the
asking too
screen?
much.
God, obviously.
Have a mind through.
Okay, well, collaboration is good. So I always like to acknowledge, what I want to do is just briefly show you some pictures of some of my collaborative work and engaged scholarship. And I always like to acknowledge the ancestors, and one of the important mentors for me is the late Grace Lee Boggs, who is the Detroit-based Marxist feminist revolutionary who, in her 100-year life, after having participated in nearly every major social and environmental justice movement in the 20th and 21st centuries, concluded that, quote, social movements are born of critical connections rather than critical mass. And I agree with Boggs that building critical connections across differences of all kinds is really what fuels strong communities and robust socio-ecological movements. And these alliances, I think, are vitally important at this, quote, time on the clock of the world, as Boggs famously put it. Okay, I've got to do this again. Okay. So I also think that developing diverse and resilient communities in these times of uncertainty and danger requires an intentional focus on relationship building. So in the chapter that you read, I wrote about how my colleague Kyle Powis-White argues that in part, the climate crisis is a result of ongoing colonial systems that have shattered generations of kinship relationships that were long based on reciprocity and consent. And for White and many others, kinship relationships are the foundations of social and ecological interdependence. And when these relationships of interdependence are ruptured through, for example, dispossessing people of their land or their livelihoods, their language or their culture, then social and ecological and climate systems are also disrupted. So for White and many other Indigenous leaders, acknowledging, repairing, and rebuilding kinship relationships are key components of how I have understood and practiced commoning in southeastern Pennsylvania. And of course, in my own environmental studies and environmental justice research and activism, the idea of place is centrally important. And currently, the place that I live and work in is southeastern Pennsylvania, in the metropolitan region of Philadelphia, also known as Lenape-Hoking, which is the never ceded ancestral territory of the Lenni Lenape people. And as someone who's living in the settler colonial United States, I think a lot about the ways that care-based communities must be built through an anti-colonial perspective, and I strive to incorporate this perspective into my own environmental justice and commoning practices. And part of engaging in anti-colonial environmental justice practice is taking seriously the histories of the land that we are living on and learning about the long-standing connections to land and place and the sustainable lifeways practiced by the people who have lived there for generations. And because the land that we stand on is often unacknowledged or backgrounded, an important part of my own critical practice has been to engage in what scholar Leanne Simpson calls land as pedagogy. And I do this by situating my research, teaching, and activism in the places, geographies, and community ecologies in which I live. I try to accomplish what I call a pedagogy of engagement in my own work together with my students and community partners, to challenge academia as usual and to imagine and practice collaborative kin-making and interdependency in our daily lives and also in our environmental change work. And I'm interested in thinking about how many scholars think about this practice as an abolition practice, or what geographer Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls life in rehearsal. That is creating and acting in your everyday life today, the social and ecological relationships that will enable the transition to the future that you're working towards, or what Grace Lee Boggs called prefigurative politics. So in the spirit of putting these ideas into action, I just want to share a couple of examples of how I and my students and community partners are attempting to build kinship relationships and prefigurative environmental justice politics, living and working with residents in the cities of both Philadelphia and Chester, which is a city very close to Swarthmore. So in the chapter that I sent you, I've focused most explicitly, if not exclusively, on the community engagements with my students and partners in Philadelphia. And one of these collaborations is known as Serenity Solar, which is a collaborative that I co-founded in 2012 with community partners in Philadelphia. And it was started as a university community collaboration between students and faculty at Swarthmore College and community members from North Philadelphia, with the mission to bring solar technology, sustainable community development, and green jobs training opportunities to local residents in this considered to be the most impoverished and underserved section of the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. So in recent years, many of my students and I have collaborated with members of Chester residents concerned for quality living, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think that this work that we've been doing is fundamentally about marginalized communities fighting for their right to what feminists refer to as social reproduction, what Diana referred to in her amazing introduction. I'd love to get that introduction, by the way. So social reproduction, or the life-making activities required to sustain everyday life into the future. So I teach a community-based learning course focused on environmental justice at Swarthmore. And in this course, students learn about the theory and practice of social reproduction as part of an environmental justice perspective. And they learn about how communities of color and low-income communities across the country and the world have organized and risen up to fight against the long history and ongoing structures of settler colonialism and environmental racism, that have put the lives and futures of their communities at risk. So as a part of the course, the students engage in research and action projects with residents of environmental justice communities. So these are just some images of the kinds of kin building, relationship building activities that my students and I have done with residents of North Philadelphia. Oh, the arrow is now working. Working to bring partners together to train local youth and young people in solar installation and solar enterprise development. We've worked with organizations across the country, including Revolve out of San Francisco, that helps to finance solar installation and also helps with training. A local solar installation company that has a focus on climate justice and environmental justice. This is in North Philadelphia. Again, working as a partner to help train and help local youth job shadow. Here are some of the first solar apprentices that we worked with on one of the building of a community organization called Serenity House. In addition to building solar opportunities and solar training opportunities, we also work with local organizations in North Philadelphia that are building community gardens on abandoned lots. We also, you can see here, the community was interested in ways that they could charge their cell phones when the power goes out, which happens a lot in that part of the city during storms. And so we built a solar charging pole in the community gardens. So now when the power goes out, this part of Philadelphia says we have a solar charging pole, and we are actually more so even than other parts of the city moving towards this hopeful future. Oh, I forgot to mention that we spell solar, S-O-U-L-A-R, with the intention of really highlighting and centering the community in climate justice and not just the technology. We've worked with other local urban agriculture and food justice and food sovereignty organizations, including Urban Creators and on their Life Do Grow farm, which is right in the center of inner city Philadelphia. And you can see here we've solarized their farm shed that they are using to distribute organic, freshly made or freshly grown produce. This is Kai Sanders, who is the first solar apprentice who worked with us in North Philadelphia, and Kai trained with our community partner, the solar installation company, and now has started her own solar business. She is the first Black woman, and she's a Black woman solar trainer and business leader in Philadelphia, and is also interested in bringing more women of color and queer folks into the green economy future. We worked with another North Philadelphia organization called the Village of Arts and Humanities, a 30-year-old organization that uses the arts to build community and build relationships. We ended up solarizing their building as part of what they called a staying power initiative. And the idea is, how can sustainability, if it's actually relevant to local communities, in this case, Black and brown communities in North Philadelphia, to resist gentrification and to allow communities, organizations, and people to stay in their communities by reducing their energy costs, for example. This is an image of the solar array that we put on their community center. So I want to just, in the next few minutes, and then have a conversation, talk a little bit about again, building relationships, community building, kin building practices that my students and I and community partners have been doing in another neighboring city near Swarthmore College, where I teach, Chester. And Chester is a small city located along the Delaware River that's about 15 miles south of Philadelphia and about 4 miles east of the elite Arboretum of Swarthmore College. It has a population of about 34,000 and approximately 74% are African-American residents. So we work with the organization called Chester Residents Concerned for Quality Living, or CIRCLE, and it was founded in 1992 by Zuline Mayfield and other residents in Chester. And it's been leading a nearly 30-year battle to demand the end of their community being targeted as a toxic dumping ground for waste management in the region. The city of Chester houses the largest waste incinerator in the United States, and it burns approximately 3,500 tons of trash per day. This city is also home to a host of other polluting facilities, oil refinery, sludge incinerator, chemical plants. So Zuline Mayfield, who's pictured here, has always expressed the belief to me and my students that it's important for those of us living in the upscale community of Swarthmore to see ourselves as being in kinship relationships with Chester, with the residents of Chester, despite the fact that our backgrounds and life conditions may be miles apart. This, by the way, is the picture of the incinerator, the Covanta incinerator, the largest incinerator in the United States. And Zuline, in this Instagram post, Zuline, I think, expresses this notion of interconnectedness, despite the fact that our everyday life conditions may be very different. She says, Chester does not have a Wakanda shield over the city, keeping the pollutants from traveling all over the region. The pollution doesn't just hover over Chester. The rest of Delaware County is also affected by the incinerator. We all breathe the same air. So she insists that pollution needs to be understood as a problem that affects all of us. And this is despite the fact that her community has one of the highest rates of asthma in the country. But she is really committed to reaching out to students, to faculty, to other community partners in the region and saying we have to create this we across these differences of these racial and class and geographic differences, because ultimately that pollution is going to also affect your life. And my students, when they learn about this and when they see these possibilities of building these cross-community collaborations, they get fired up and they want to connect their academic studies with active community engagement to activate or to advocate for more just approaches to how their own institutions of higher education, their own colleges conduct their business. So this message of interconnectedness has really influenced the young people in the region for the last almost 30 years, almost as long as the organization CIRCLE what was founded. Students all around the Philadelphia region from different colleges and universities started what's known as C4, or the Campus Coalition Concerning Chester. And this was in direct response to young people saying they want their environmental studies, which is supposed to be so progressive and so inclusive. They want their environmental studies to actually mean something and to not be so dislocated from what's happening literally next door. And especially when they learn that all of the waste, including sewage, including toxic waste, including all of the waste from laboratories in their biology departments and chem departments that they're learning all this amazing stuff in, goes to Chester to get burned, just 3-4 miles away. So when they start to think about this place-based relationship, it starts to make them want to imagine environmental studies in a more engaged and interdependent way. So students have, again, as part of my environmental justice course, students work with research projects with Chester residents concerned for quality living. They engage in canvassing, they engage in protests, in die-ins. Here they have a die-in in front of the county council building, which is the body that decides on solid waste management policy. They work with youth and residents to address young people's concerns about the future of their community. They learn about gardening. Sowing Seeds of Hope is a movement to bring community gardening and teaching kids about food justice and food sovereignty. Many youth in Chester identify gun violence as one of the most important environmental problems that they face. And so part of our organizing is thinking about the connections between environmental racism and gun violence, of which there are many. And this is something that young people in Chester sort of get immediately. They testify at county council meetings about the kind of waste management they want to see happening in their county. They co-present at academic conferences with me and Zulene. Again, direct action, community building with other activist organizations and other students across the region. This is an organization in Philadelphia that shut down the country's oldest oil refinery, which exploded and then eventually shut down 2 years ago. The annual Environmental Justice March that brings hundreds of people into Chester to really energize and engage this concept of that we are in this together. And finally, the most recent assault that has faced Chester residents and the region is a backdoor negotiations with local politicians and business leaders to bring an LNG plant, liquefied natural gas plant, from fracked gas in the Marcellus Shale in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania, to bring liquefied natural gas tankers to Chester to then export it to Europe because of the Russian war in Ukraine, and now the discourse that we need to sell as much gas as we possibly can to Europe, our allies in Europe. So one of the East Coast, the East Coast only has 2 LNG export facilities, and the next one is targeted to be placed in Chester. So because of our allies, these backdoor meetings were revealed because of these relationships, and so local politicians, including a state representative here, Carol Kazim, started meeting with activists in the Gulf Coast, building these trans-community collaborations about how to fight LNG plants, how to work together. This is Rochetta Ozane from Louisiana, and working together with Chester residents. So again, building these cross-community, transnational actually collaborations. Here at German climate justice organization came to Chester last year to meet Zulene Mayfield and Circle residents, because the port that the exported gas was going to go to is in a city in Germany, and it's already being built because of the notion that this is going to happen. So here we have transnational organizing between European potential terminals of the exported gas and then the environmental justice organizations. Here you have students are able to really frame it right. as you can see, and organizing and working to support this movement, doing, they do these amazing, I don't know how that they do it, but they do these wonderful Instagram posts supporting the organization. And finally, even though this task force, this LNG task force to build the largest export facility on the East Coast, thought that they were going to be successful. They didn't think this community would rise up, but they did. This was at the meeting in August. And it was extraordinary how many residents showed up and said no. I don't know if many of you remember Shirley Chisholm, who was the congresswoman from New York, who famously said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And here's Zuline with her folding chair that she brought to this task force meeting. And yet you can see the racial and gender makeup of the task force. And Zuline and the mayor of Chester speaking, and that they were at first barred from the meeting. So this concept that we bring our voices to the table. This was just last week. This is finally here. After President Biden announced last week that he was going to put a pause on approving new LNG export facilities, we held a press conference with Circle in Chester and some of my students, and to express thanks that at least for now, Chester can breathe a sigh of relief that this new facility won't be built anytime in the near future. But the potential developer says that this isn't going to stop us, because I mean this pause could actually be overturned at any time. But I think that one of the things that came out of this meeting, not shown here, are local state representatives as well, who are saying now we are going to use this opportunity to fund a sustainable industry in Chester, rather than this city being the region's waste repository or waste management repository. And so we're now starting this region-wide collaborative called the Good Energy Collaborative, working to create workshops with young people, with young adults, both in Chester and Philadelphia. So we're organizing across the borders of these two regions, the larger metropolitan area of Philadelphia and also Chester. And people are excited about it. So we're calling this the Good Energy Collaborative. And certainly that includes renewable energy, but it also includes all the other different kinds of energy that we're going to need. And so our tagline is, we believe we need all the good energy we can muster. Mm-hmm. So thank you. I think I probably spoke more than, but please let me know if you have questions or thoughts or comments.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Giovanna. We want to keep the spirit of our workshop. So, we welcome all ideas, this aim of tinkering ideas, building together, that the workshop, has in its core meaning. So if anybody wants to jump in.
Students get the first dibs. We do have a hand online as well. Okay, yeah, please, let's.
Thank you so much. This was so rich, and I also loved reading your chapter. I'm a grad student here in anthropology.
Wonderful.
First of all, I wanted to ask you maybe if you can talk a little bit more about the process of building the project, the solar project, how it was to engage with the community and build together this project in the neighborhood. Another thing is more of a comment. I really liked your critique of the Anthropocene. And another thing that brought me an idea is how Anthropocene, I think White also talks about this. Anthropocene is paralyzing also, and that erases these possibilities of political action from the ground. And that also connects me to how do you see like the tension between these institutional arrangements, that how you say here also the duality of global and local, right? How these institutional arrangements of the local that frame participation in politics in a certain way engage with these local ways of what it means to do politics and engage community.
Okay, so let me start with that. Thank you for these questions and for reading the text. Thank you very much. So you're interested in knowing sort of how we built the solar
Yeah.
collaborative. I mean, it was interesting because we started out being I always sort of wait until I'm asked before, or I'm invited before I go into a community with my students. And so some local activists had heard me give a talk at Swarthmore and wanted to know how sustainability could be relevant to North Philadelphia. And so we started in these conversations about what that might look like. Maybe a green roof to grow crops, to grow food, because North Philadelphia is notoriously suffering from food apartheid. Very few grocery stores available with fresh food. So we had community meetings. And again, led by the community partners who we were involved in. We had community meetings with my students and with partners, and there were some tough questions. There were really tough questions. For example, what are you doing here? Are you just going to come in and leave like all the others have done? You ask us questions over and over again. You write down data. You leave, and you never bring back what you've talked about or written about or found out. I will also say that Temple University is a university, a public university located in North Philadelphia that is also notoriously eating up land. So it's gentrifying the northern part of the city. So students are often seen as interlopers rather than partners. So we really worked as hard as we could to build those kinds of relationships that we're going to be here for the long haul, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says we need to be doing. And we have, it's already been 12 years. So there's trust that has built literally with that time frame. But so people started asking questions about what could sustainability be and what could jobs be. And the idea of solar came up, and that just sparked a huge interest that solar could be something that was relevant to communities with incredibly high unemployment rates. And also the loss of power during virtually every thunderstorm. So I think that notion of building trust, and then through that trust, we invited other partners who were the experts in solar and started doing workshops. And we did the smallest trainings, literally putting one solar panel on the back of the organization and showing how it could light up security lighting, just that one solar panel. And that's gained a lot of interest in the community. So we were able to then solarize other community organizations. And we're hoping to do the same in Chester, but it's still on the ground level in terms of that kind of trust. Could you just clarify for me your second piece?
I will let other people.
Okay, we can talk.
No doubt we'll run out of time.
Giovanna.
What do you think, Diana? You wanna
Sure.
answer around if you want to? What do you think?
Two questions, unrelated, but two questions. When you say that you solarized, where is the funding for that? Who's paying for that and who's actually doing the work? That's where that connection I'm a little unclear about. And then the other part comes from somebody who's done community engaged learning with my master's students. I'm Brenda Bushhouse from the University of Massachusetts, and I'm at the School of Policy. Now I have undergraduates. And we have a new public policy major, and we're trying to create these ongoing relationships. But that's a very challenging thing to do. And so I'm curious how you've been able to, it takes a lot of time
Yes.
to build those relationships. So I would like to know a bit more about the demands on your time as a faculty member and how you are balancing the very time intensive community engagement.
Well, really important questions. I did some of my work at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts, so, and had many colleagues at the University of Massachusetts. But do you mean Amherst?
Yes.
Yes, okay. The community solarizing process requires partners. It requires, capital outlays and financing. And so we worked with a San Francisco-based organization called Revolve that helps to finance community organizations that are doing work focused on environmental justice. So what they do is they fundraise themselves to be able to support the sort of original outlay of capital that's needed to put a solar array on a community building. So the organization doesn't have any upfront costs. And the Revolve finances it, fully finances it, but the organization goes into a 20-year lease agreement with Revolve. And so they end up paying something like 20% less on their electricity bill until they own the panels outright. So that has been the major way that we have helped with financing community organizations. So they end up paying less on their monthly bills. The solar installers the one that we've used in North Philadelphia is called Solar States. And so it's an organization that is based in the community and has values grounded in environmental justice, which is why we selected them. And their goal is to hire local installers and to train them. So with some of the young people who we supported getting trained in solar installation, they were able to job shadow with this local installation company and eventually were hired by the company. But then the company helps them to start their own business. And that's why the image of Kai Sanders, she had job shadowed with that company. So it's about working out these business models that are creative and that are grounded in so-called triple bottom line idea of being committed to the community, being committed to the economic security of the local community, and sharing the market. So that's not true of all solar installers, but by the way.
Exactly.
So you really do need to figure out who you collaborate with and sort of how you're going to do it. But that did that respond to that question? The other question is absolutely right. I mean, some institutions will not value this kind of work. So it can be a risk for junior faculty members because it's time consuming. And as you may know, as others may know, as Zuline Mayfield said to me when I first met her, that was tough. It was tough building her trust. We've been studied to death. And so much money has been, many professors, many researchers have gotten, all kinds of federal research money, community, that's supposed to have a community focus, right? Or an environmental justice focus, and they get the funding from the federal or state sources. And then, so tons of money has been poured into Chester, but Chester residents see very little of it, or even the benefits of the research. So, so you do things like go to funerals and weddings and potlucks, and it's really that level of relationship building, and it does take time. It's that, again, it's that building trust through the everyday life-making activities. And so, it takes time. And the institution I was working at in Western Mass, Mount Holyoke College, supported that kind of work. Swarthmore College has a Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility that has that supports through significant amount of funding the Environmental Justice and Community Resilience Program that I coordinate. And so it depends that there is this necessity to have that kind of focus and to value it in the institution. But that's why I have in my work this critique of the institution, the critique of the university as an institution that in fact wants to separate itself from the local or from the community. But I think there are some pockets where those possibilities are happening. But there's no way to get around the labor intensity of this work. There's no way to get around it. And so, in many ways, you don't get around it. You enjoy it. You flourish from it. And one of, and I will say, and I hope that the photos demonstrate this, that the value, in terms of an educational process are just extraordinary. I mean, and I aim to bring my students, bring the alums from the EJ programs that, we've been working on for the last decades, to bring them all together at some point to sort of see what happens when you actually see yourself as part of a community and committed to that, and how that impacts your future choices and the future work that you do. I think it's powerful. Did that respond to your second question? Okay.
We might need to do a lightning round. What do you think, Deanna? Maybe, what do you think? Should we turn online next?
Yes, definitely.
So Ra, you are up. You can hear us okay? Yeah, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your really insightful presentation, and thank you for the great job you've been doing with your students. So I have a couple of questions. So first, I'm an environmental activist from Tunisia and a PhD candidate in environmental humanities. My first question has to do with COP, the Conference of Parties. I attended COP26 and COP27, and I started to kind of lose hope about, the whole process. And I curious to know what you think about the COP process, and especially that we don't currently have any other alternative at an international level. And the second question is, how really can we distinguish the common process, this bottom-up approach and community-based solutions from the discourse that we now hear about what I'm going to call individualizing the crime? That is all the discourse that we hear, be the change, you are responsible, all these types of be like of individual responsibility, whereas we all know that we are not all responsible in the same way, because I feel like this discourse is a way to for governments and the dominant discourse to evade the responsibility of the countries from the global north. So basically, how can we distinguish all this bottom-up approach, the common process that you just mentioned, from the dominant discourse of individualized crimes, if that makes sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I don't know where to look, but I can see you, but thank you for your both of your questions. And again, they're both more than 3-minute responses, definitely, but in some ways they're related, because the COP, of course, is supposed to be the global response, the international response to problems that are that have their impact on the global scale, but certainly on the local scale too. I don't, this is a tough question for me, because I don't have a lot of hope for the COP, I have to say. And so I can't be that rosy, there's hope and let me show you where the hope is. But on the other hand, the former head of the COP, Cristiana Figueres, who was the leader who shepherded through the Paris Agreement. And she's from Costa Rica, and she's a Swarthmore alum. So she came to Swarthmore in 2012. And she came to my environmental studies class, and at the time, the Swarthmore students had just started a year earlier the first fossil fuel divestment movement in the country. And so she came, and the administrators and the board at Swarthmore were trying to convince her to convince the students to stop trying to get the college to divest from its fossil fuel investments. And Swarthmore College has a large something like a $3 billion portfolio. Yeah. So she did that. She was trying to convince the students it's not the time to divest. And so instead she said to me, why don't you apply for non-governmental observer status, which I said, well, okay. So, well, we did. And so we've been going for the last 13 years or 12 years, but, and I went twice also, and I was really depressed. So I haven't gone since, but, the one thing I can, so I'll just say, since Cristiana came and since the Paris Agreement and beyond, she's totally for fossil fuel divestment, and she's become radicalized. And so now she's writing letters to the board and saying, you're shameful for not divesting. But so people do change. But I don't know what to say about that hope, except for it's one of the spaces that one of the only truly international spaces, including indigenous nations from across the globe, that have a space to come, and if not in the in the green zones or blue zones or whatever it is, I've forgotten now the zones, if they are kept out, sometimes with military interference, which I experienced when it was in Lima, Peru. There's still that sort of capacity for exchange. And I think that there's a benefit there, even though it's incredibly expensive in terms of funding to get there, but also the carbon cost is expensive too. I think at least my framing of bottom up, ground up organizing is that it attempts to, or its goal is to challenge individualism. and its goal is to challenge that, there are little things you can do every day to stop climate change, which I'm not disparaging doing many things. But I think that the notion of the collective organizing, envisioning a possible future where we are in fact working together across differences, and building power from those small scale, and then growing into potentially, a larger trans community or national or transnational connections. So you start to see yourself as being part of a growing community. I think that changes and contests the power of the dominant individualistic discourse. That's what I've seen. But it's partly all of us challenging the individualism of the PhD process. And there are, and that's a struggle.
I wish we had a lot more time, my goodness, right? But lunch, to continue the discussion, what do you think?
We have lunch right out here, so if you want to grab your lunch, bring it back to the table, we can have lunch and continue the conversation. If you have to leave, I also absolutely understand, but if you can stay, it would be fun to,
Yes, thank you so much for everyone for coming.
No, that was amazing. I'm sorry. We all.
Well,
I saw that. Cecilia, can you hear us?
Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
I know that you can't as easily eat with us, so if we wanted to say something, you're welcome to.
Yes, please, because she cannot have lunch with us.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, see me, or?
We can hear you and hear you and see you.
Okay, thanks a lot for a very inspiring presentation. I'm in Bogota, and I'm a former colleague of
I can still
Diana of
connect you with
the University
Abby,
of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could
Oh, it's like,
maybe
we're just saying it could be a lonely process.
tell us a little bit more about the incinerator and
I remember
whether
holding up in the library somewhere.
the
Sorry.
political debate has been expanded in the community because of the work of the community.
I feel like a
You
monk,
know,
right?
there has been like a debate on where the waste is coming from and what the impact is. Yeah, like what is the political debate regionally, in terms of the incinerator, given that it's the largest, and also what is
It's for a good
scale
cause
of
and
the
it's supposed to end well.
for the incinerator?